The story I'm about to tell is very sad, and I'll warn you that it may contain triggers. I will keep my name secret and will also change the names of those involved. This story ended up with the police, and I don't want my identity to come to light. I'll start by saying that I come from a humble family. Even though my father was the son of a great farmer, he was disinherited for having become emotionally involved with the cook's daughter. According to my father, my grandmother was an extremely prejudiced and racist woman. My father was very much in love with my mother. He didn't listen to her and went away to live with his love, far away from my grandmother. I mean, not that far away, but in the neighboring town, which was 100 kilometers away. My mother became pregnant with me, and just when everything seemed to have fallen into place, my father was fired. Maybe my grandmother even had a hand in it, because, according to my father, he suspected that she was involved in witchcraft. On the farm where he grew up, there was a huge shed that was far from the house, and both children and employees were prohibited from going near it. Many times, he saw a strange movement of people on certain dates of the year, in addition to seeing certain animals being taken there and never leaving. But I only found out about this when I was already an adult. Going back to my past, we lived in the interior of the state, and there weren't many jobs available there. The good thing is that in a small town, people tend to be very supportive. So one of the neighbors, who was a truck driver, managed to convince his boss to employ my father. As the years went by, my father left the house job and was promoted to truck driver. According to what he told me years later, this company did not pay a fair salary, but he still preferred to continue working for them, as they were the ones who reached out to him when he needed them. We lived in a very simple house in the middle of the woods, which was 40 minutes from the urban area. Due to work, my father would spend weeks away from home. I remember that I often played in the backyard with my mother. I was very happy at that time. She was my only friend, as I didn't even have any neighbors there. My life gained a little grace when the mayor of our city provided school transport as an incentive to study for all children and teenagers who lived far away. This bus picked us up on the side of the road, and so I started going to school, where I made lots of friends my age. One day, I saw my parents hugging each other and crying a lot. At that time, I was already around 9 years old. I asked why they were so sad, and my mother said they had watched a film that made them cry. In my little child's head, that made sense. I hugged them both and even scolded them, saying they shouldn't waste time watching films like that. After that day, my mother lost her shine, and little by little, sadness took over her. Whenever I asked her to play, she said she was tired. She gave me a small Bible as a gift and said that whenever I felt empty and sad, I should read a little of the Bible, because God would fill the missing space. My father's presence at home became more frequent, but he didn't pay me much attention during that period. Nowadays, I know why, but at the time I had no idea what situation they were facing. I can't remember precisely, as I was only 8 years old at the time, but I have vague memories that from one moment to the next my mother started staying in bed all day. I remember my father saying I needed to let my mother rest. Once I even got scolded from my father for waking up my mother and asking her to make me food. One day while I was at school, my mother was rushed to the hospital in the neighboring town, as the countryside where we lived did not have emergency care. Those days were terrible. I had to go to my grandmother's house, because my father, in addition to not being able to leave work aside, also had to work shifts at the hospital with my mother. I'm not sure how long I spent at my grandmother's house, a week, 2, maybe 3. All I know is that I never saw my mother again. Yes, she passed away. Today I know that she discovered cancer at an advanced stage, but my parents hid it from me so as not to hurt me. I don't know what to say. I don't know if they were right to hide the truth from me. I just know that her death destroyed me. I couldn't even say goodbye to her. The last memory I have of my mother is seeing her lying in that bed. I even insulted her because she wouldn't get up to play with me. If you're thinking that this is the sad part of the story, you're wrong. That's not even a third of what I've been through in my life. The worst is yet to come. After my mother's death, things got tough. I had to stay at my grandmother's house because my father, who continued working as a truck driver, was away from home for a long time, and of course, I couldn't live there alone. Things were terrible at my grandmother's house. She was incapable of giving me affection and had rules for everything. I was prohibited from approaching that warehouse. Furthermore, she was always talking bad about my father, saying he was no good. She even had the ability to speak ill of my mother, saying that she was unlucky and that, because I had the same blood as her, I could bring bad luck into her life. Those words hurt me so much, because I was still grieving. After all, who wants to hear someone speaking badly about their mother, especially when she is no longer alive? One day, my grandmother caught me leafing through the small Bible that my mother gave me before she passed away. She took the Bible from my hand with a lot of hatred in her eyes, started tearing it page by page, and said that the God to whom I was giving myself would not give me anything in return. He didn't even offer a cure for my mother. She said that if I ever really wanted to be someone, I would need to follow another path. She seriously said that her God was the only one capable of offering riches and a pleasant life, and that he was so powerful that he could destroy any enemy. I was horrified, both because she had torn up that gift that my mother gave me with so much love, and because she had mentioned my mother's death with so much disdain. I left her talking to herself and ran outside. I couldn't argue with her or leave. I was just a child. I couldn't stand that coexistence. She was too grumpy. His grumbles started at breakfast. She said that the only son who made her proud was Marcos. He no longer lived there. He moved away after finishing high school and went to study medicine in New York. When my dad finally came home after 2 or 3 weeks on the road, he would take me back to our house. I got tired of telling him that I hated staying with my grandmother and asked him to get another job so he could take care of me, but of course, that wasn't up to him. I didn't understand. I was suffering too much alongside her. I prayed every night for it to change, until one day it really did. I was almost 12 years old. My father went to my grandmother's house much earlier than expected and told me that he had very good news to tell me. He told me to pack my things, as we were moving to New York. He had received a job offer that he couldn't refuse, and, despite continuing to be a truck driver, he would earn much better and could offer me a decent life. I was very, very excited, because I was dying to leave that evil witch's house. Coincidentally, we were going to move to the same city where my Uncle Marcos lived, the uncle my grandmother spoke so highly of. He and my father were very close in the past and never stopped keeping in touch. When he found out we were about to move there, he offered to host us at his house at least until my father was stable in his job and could afford a nanny to take care of me. Initially, these were the plans. The fact of not having to pay rent would be crucial during that adjustment period. My father spent the whole way making recommendations, saying that I needed to behave at my Uncle Marcos's house and that I couldn't throw a tantrum. As soon as he said that, I laughed. Tantrum? I didn't even throw tantrums anymore. I had already grown up. My uncle was a 40-year-old man, married to a woman I will call Laura. He was quite lucky. In fact, as my grandmother said, he deserved it. At first, I thought she was just another crazy person admitted there, but the details she gave me were very real. She said the person who did this would get change and pay with their life. We struck up a beautiful friendship, and she told me that she was a luxury escort and became emotionally involved with one of her clients, who was married. It was this woman who did the spell for her. Mirela told me that she was only in a worse situation because she became suspicious and sought spiritual help from a witch. During my stay at that clinic, I stayed close to Mirela because I needed to know how it worked. Your explanations about black magic didn't scare me at all. On the contrary, in those words I found the impulse I needed. I was hospitalized there for exactly 1 month and 5 days. I'm going to tell you something that I'm not at all proud of, something that I'm extremely ashamed of, but I need to get it off my chest with you. Today I try to erase all my past, but it's hard to forget the things I had to do to get enough money to end Mark. When leaving the clinic, I was motivated to destroy that guy's life and willing to do anything to achieve my goal. Not even the birth of my little sister moved me. The only feelings that nourished my days were resentment and hatred. I looked for the woman who managed Mirela and said I wanted to work for her. Her name was Eloisa. At first, she refused, claiming that I was a prisoner, as I wasn't even 17 yet. But upon rethinking, he saw that this could generate a good profit. We talked about commissions and I agreed. This was the easiest way to get the amount needed to put an end to that scoundrel. Since I had no evidence, and even if I had, his father had a lot of money and had hired the best lawyer. At most, he would save himself by paying a simple deposit. It would be difficult to sleep with men, as I had no experience and the only relationships I had were forced, which would certainly bring me new traumas. But like I said, I was motivated by hate. I couldn't let it stay like that. I look like a liar and Mark lives his good life? No, not really. Mark needed to pay. For the first 3 months, I was with all kinds of men. I was a traumatized young woman, and it was really hard having to sleep with each of them. But the desire to end Mark was greater than the disgust I felt towards these guys. The luck was that they did not pose any danger, as everything was very well managed by that woman. Among those disgusting men, I met one who was saved. His name was Armando. He was old enough to be my father, in fact, come to think of it, maybe old enough to be my grandfather. But he was very nice to me. After I stayed with him 3 times, he took me to lunch. From there, we went to the mall. He gave me a cell phone, clothes, shoes, bags, everything branded. That day I felt like the princess on Gugu's show. Still, it didn't bring me an ounce of joy. From that day on, we got seriously involved and I abandoned that easy life. I fell in love with him, and even if he was poor, I would have stayed with him. He pulled me out of the hole. Even though I loved Armando, hatred for Mark still pulsed in my mind and in my veins. I told him everything I went through at my uncle's house and explained that it was to get revenge that I decided to sell myself to have money to pay a wizard. He was moved by my suffering and even cried hugging me. He said he would support me if I decided to continue with my revenge plan. However, he said he did not believe in this type of spiritual help. Actually, I didn't even believe it, but it was my only hope. Willing to help me, Armando spoke to some acquaintances, and one of them gave him the phone number and address of a powerful wizard. I felt hopeful. We called and scheduled for the next day. Armando didn't go with me. He claimed that this revenge was mine and that, therefore, I should do this part alone. I didn't believe it. I could see he was scared, but I wasn't scared. I was filled with courage and motivation. The next day, at 10 a.m. sharp, I was already there at the door of the wizard's house waiting for him to help me. Our meeting was scheduled for 11, but my anxiety didn't allow me to arrive at the right time. When I entered that house, I felt a strong energy. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like we weren't alone. What made the place even scarier was the fact that the house was painted black inside. The lighting didn't help either. It was very dim and there were large mirrors in the 4 corners of the room. I explained the reasons that led me there. My conversation with this wizard brought back memories of my grandmother. He stated that God was not as kind as everyone says, and that only the devil could offer wealth and revenge. Mr. Nicholas gave me his price and asked for personal items from Mark, as he couldn't guarantee me without anything from him. I felt a little unmotivated, as I didn't have access to my uncle's house. However, my father did. He still had the keys from there, but I wasn't even going to my father's house anymore. What's more, he was still a truck driver and lived on the road. I said goodbye and promised to keep in touch. As soon as I got home, I called my dad and he told me he would be back in 3 days. He was more present because of the baby. I waited anxiously, and on the agreed day, I met my father. Everything happened as I expected, and he didn't even notice. I had a lot of regrets about him. He didn't support me when I needed a father most. Now all I needed to do was work up the courage to break into the house and steal one of Mark's clothes. I knew everyone's routine there. I knew the days my aunt sold cake in the square. I knew the times Mark went to the gym. My uncle was never home. So, I got brave and went back to that house. Of course I went well before Mark left. I needed to make sure he had gone to the gym. Entering that house again brought me all those negative emotions. All my suffering came to the surface. I tried not to lose heart and ran to the laundry room, where Mark's underwear was kept. I left there feeling like a real criminal. I returned home and called Mr. Nicholas, scheduling my return for Saturday. I showed up there and gave him the deal. A month passed and nothing happened. I kept in touch with my father every day. If something happened, my uncle would call him, as he had assured me that Mark would pay. He asked me for patience and said that this would happen as soon as possible. And he didn't lie. About 20 days after that call, I received the news that made me jump out of my chair. Mark was hospitalized in serious condition with brain death. One of the gym machines fell and hit his head. No tears fell from my eyes. On the contrary, it brought some peace of mind. I suffered for years at the hands of those animals. I didn't need to do anything against the vixen. She will pay for the harm she did to me for the rest of her life. A week after admission, he stopped breathing. With that, a great doubt began to torment my days. Did my grandmother cast a spell to destroy my mother? I will never know the answer, but I always wonder. It's been a few years. I managed to overcome the trauma of being abused, but today I suffer from many nightmares about Mark saying he came to get me. Because of this, I live on medication. But I'm not an unhappy woman anymore. Armando and I are still together today. I don't know what I would have done if this man hadn't appeared in my life.